Good morning, everybody. Well, thank you for joining us. It's great to see so many of you this morning. As I said before, for those that have any questions that they'd like to ask, please feel free to type them into the Q&A box at the bottom. We will run through the presentation first and then look to answer those at the end. And if we don't get time, we're conscious how busy people are, so we are looking to finish at 11:45. But for any questions we don't get to, we'll make sure we share them all with you. So without further ado, let me share the presentation and I will hand over to Stuart. Bear with me. Okay.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. This is a little bit of delay on my system, so please bear with me. So good morning and welcome, and thank you for joining our webinar, as Sarah just said, about designing small, agile office environments. We're going to base today on a case study, and that's Ingleton Wood's London office, which is home to 50 of our 200 staff. I'd like to start by just doing a couple of intros. First of all, oops, there is a delay on my system. So just by way of introduction, firstly, myself, Stuart Norgott, I'm an equity partner at Ingleton Wood, and we are a multidisciplinary construction consultancy. I'm an architect and I head up our London office. Nicole Flynn, who is an associate of our business and an architect of Ingleton Wood. She leads our interiors discipline and she's lead for Ingleton Wood's agile projects. And then we've got Colin Stuart, who's director of Baker Stuart. He's a workplace consultant and advisor for all of our agile projects. A little bit about the contents, excuse me. Firstly, we're going to talk about why we did what we did, and I'll cover that. Then we're going to talk about how we got it done and what the results were. And Colin and Nicole are going to talk about that a little bit later on. And so now I'm going to hand over to Colin, who's going to give you a brief sort of introduction to agile working before we talk about the detail of the case study.
Thanks, Stuart. Yes, as Stuart said, I was privileged to work with Ingleton Wood and Nicole's design team in trying to understand their needs and come up with a vision for their new space. But before we sort of go, as Stuart said, before we go into any more detail on that, what I wanted to do was just give a bit of background as to why I think this project is so relevant. Actually, it's not. There we go. Right, great. Why this project is so relevant in the current situation where we've got obviously the COVID pandemic changing the way we work. Agile working, or as we called it back in the 1990s, new ways of working, has been around since then and been around since the mid-90s. Often also called activity-based working. It's gaining increased momentum in recent years with advances in technology. COVID-19 has obviously accelerated this, as I'm sure you're all finding, and we've found it's removed very much of the previous reluctance in managers and their team members. I've been implementing agile projects and flexible working projects for the last 20 years. And one of the biggest barriers we used to find was a reluctance in staff and particularly managers in trusting that home working would work, trusting that remote working would work, trusting people to be productive. I think the COVID pandemic has swept that away. It's leading to a step change in our relationship with the office. And the demand for more flexible ways of working post-pandemic, I think, is unprecedented. We've been surveying staff attitudes for a number of clients since the start of the pandemic, for the whole period, looking at trends, looking at what the likely working patterns and building occupancy levels might be when people start returning to the office, and hopefully when we get to some sort of steady state in living with the virus. And we're seeing some very interesting trends. Typically, we're seeing about 90 to 95% of staff don't want to go back to exactly how it was before. There is a definite demand for people to want to work in a very different way. Of that, from our surveys, 89%, roughly 90%, but 89% want some form of home working going forward. Typically, that's 2 to 3 days a week. 62% of staff we surveyed over the period have wanted 2 days or more. And generally, we're seeing a strong demand, funnily enough, for that, well, as you'd probably expect for it being Tuesdays and Thursdays, but a bit of a dip on Wednesdays, funnily enough. And Mondays and Fridays, demand in the space is off a cliff. So it's going to give us all some interesting challenges in how we allow that flexibility, how much flexibility do we allow, and what the implications are on our workspaces. What we can say for definite is organisations are going to have to adapt to some more flexible form of agile working in terms of not just where people work, but when and how as well. Oh, so, all right, there we go. Let's see if we can get that. There we go. Right. So as I said before, oops, what's happened here? There we go. Right. This will have a fundamental impact on how offices are designed, with a shift away from a focus on desks to much more collaborative, flexible and social working, much more collaborative and flexible and social spaces. I'm not saying that desks and task-based work areas will no longer be required. I don't agree with the people who are saying the office is dead, at least not yet. But there will, for the foreseeable future, still be a demand for some sort of task-based space, as not everyone's role, personality or personal circumstances suit home working. What we saw from our surveys is typically there was about 10 to 30% of people, depending on the client, depending on the role, depending on the industry, for whom home working is not an option or not a long-term preference. So we will always need to accommodate those people. So it's not just about how offices are designed and what is inside the offices, but also the locations in which we will be working. We've been working on some interesting hybrid solutions encompassing the office, home, and potentially local hubs. We're going to see that shift very much away from desk-based, centralized offices to perhaps a much more decentralized or even fractured solution with perhaps more smaller, agile, flexible spaces to suit the demands, to suit customer demand, to suit demands of our people, but also to give people choice. Workspace will have to work much harder to attract people into the office and ensure that we're getting that face-to-face collaboration. It needs to be, people are using the term destination workspace. It needs to work much, much harder to be a place that people want to come to. And the sort of spaces that best placed to support this way of working are actually almost identical to the agile spaces we've been providing before the pandemic. With perhaps less desks and the addition of more spaces for virtual calls, we're seeing an increased demand for what we're calling Zoom rooms, the need for small cellular spaces for teams. There will be a rise in virtual calls in the office, and we don't want the distraction in open plan space, so we'll probably see a rise in those. And it brings me on to why I think Ingleton Woods Ailey Street office is such a great example for the post-pandemic world. Even though this was designed pre-pandemic, it's a great example of how to design a small space very flexibly to give people choice and cater for those needs. And I think it's a model that we will see an awful lot more, whether that be for head office or whether that be for local hubs. So over to Stuart, who can tell you a bit more about the background.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Colin. So I'm gonna pick up on the business implications of what we did before Nicole and Colin talk about the practical sides of how we went about things. I'm going to set the scene briefly first. We've always been in Ailey Street, or for quite some time. We were in 1 Ailey Street in Aldgate, just east of the city, and it's home to 50 people of our multi-disciplines. They're all in one office space. We had 4,250 square feet, operating a traditional one-to-one person desk strategy. All desk spaces were occupied, and basically they were just an extension of people's homes. You can see there in that top right-hand corner, people's clutter and personal effects were everywhere. And literally, business expansion was being restricted by the number of desks we had. So why did we do what we did when we did it? Well, we had a lease ending event occur. The landlord in 1 Ailey Street, which you can see in the bottom left-hand corner of that slide, was repurposing the building, and we were out after being there for 14 years. So we needed to decide what was important for us if we were going to need to move. Firstly, our staff. Moving too far from our current location could have created some staff fallout, some turnover as people's routines were interrupted, and commute costs changed and all sorts of things, and they looked effectively for something else. So we needed to think about that. Secondly, we needed to think about costs. Rents had all gone up in our area. The Aldgate area has changed enormously in recent years, and we needed to avoid putting substantial additional pressures on the overhead of our business unit, and which would be reflected in the fee targets of our London teams. And so how are we going to achieve that? Well, we were definitely going to need to think reasonably laterally. So go agile. That was our first thought. Would this mean we could take less space by eliminating the one-to-one desk and person ratio? It was certainly going to give us more choice finding a space locally if we were less constrained by the size of our office floor plate. So what were the steps in achieving this? Well, having got sign off from my business partners on the way that we needed to approach the strategy, we engaged Baker Stuart to give us the analysis we needed to be confident that we could work in this new way, and also determine the range of floor areas we need to be seeking in our accommodation search. Colin's going to expand on what he did for us shortly. So we appointed an agent, Newton Perkins, and a legal team. Sorry, I've gone one slide too far. There we are. We appointed a legal team and an agent to help us do the traditional move-related things. And we eventually saw 25 properties in the area before settling on our preferred. We made sure the management team and then all the staff were on board from the start. The combination of our internal working party and Baker Stuart made sure that the task was done in an inclusive and comprehensive way right from the start. The idea was that we had no surprises. And then we designed and managed the fit out, and then we moved. And Nicole will talk to you about the detail of the design process in a few minutes. Finally, we created some simple rules that our staff contributed to, and these were about how the new space should be used differently to our previous home. Things like clear desk policy, no eating at desks, the things that we weren't really used to because we'd all had our own desk and our own little cozy environment in the office before. So what were the results and the benefits? We did stay local. We went over the road, in fact. We're still in Ailey Street. We now took a space in a newly completed Cat A space. We had seen 25 locations, but it was the one for us. It is a smaller space. It's 3,650 square feet, which is about 600 square feet less than we previously had. And all in all, it's about 20% smaller. Taking less space meant we were able to stay cost neutral, and that was another tick on one of our original goals. Having completed these types of projects for our clients, we could now say that we actually truly understood how the agile process worked, both pre-design and during the fit-out stages. So effectively at every part of the journey. And we've got a variety of new spaces now to allow staff to do the right thing, the right type of task in the right type of space, rather than from one static desk location. Our disciplines are now truly mixed, and they're not in silos. We're a multidisciplinary organisation, and that makes us much, much more integrated. Our future expansion is no longer restricted by the number of desks we have. No one has their own desk anymore. And although we only have 34 fixed traditional desks, we believe our space is able to house or home 75 staff. We were very restricted to 50 in our previous location. What were our concerns? Would it work? How would our team leads manage staff and work? Well, Colin and his team gave us the confidence and the tools we needed to allow that to be dealt with. How would our staff react? Consultation and change management from Colin's team helped us resolve those worries as well. And how would it impact on other offices in our group? We've got 5 other offices around East Anglia. Would there be accommodation envy? Well, we had to start somewhere, and we aren't the first organisation to do this. Finally, what would fit out on IT costs be? Well, we needed to set realistic budgets, and we needed to control the costs, which we did. And what are the opportunities now? Well, we've got a pilot for how IW could start to reshape the working strategies of our other offices. We've got something that is now done and tested and worked. Unfortunately, we're not there as much as we'd hoped, but we certainly had a period of time before COVID struck when we could understand how the office worked and how successful it was. We've now got an opportunity for subletting, but not perhaps in the traditional way. We can have external organisations join us, very small organisations, micro organisations if necessary, and joining a co-working arrangement, small businesses that want the facilities our space offers and are prepared to work in the same way that we do and mix in. It could provide us with some supplementary revenue, and our landlord has already agreed that this strategy is happy with that strategy. And finally, and perhaps coincidentally, we're ready for the future mix of home and office that we all know is coming post-COVID. So no accommodation strategy changes necessary there for us. And that really sums up where we got to in terms of the decision making. And now I'm going to hand back to Colin, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the work he did with us prior to the fit out process.
Thanks, Stuart. What I'd like to touch on briefly before we go to the important bit of Nicole showing us the design, the end result, is I just wanted to touch on the process that we went through with Ingleton Wood, which I think is even more relevant with the current uncertainty on how we will all be working going forward. In order to develop your new workspace, it's important that you follow a process and base this on evidence to develop your strategy in terms of how you want to be working and the culture and behaviours you want to adopt. So before pen is put to paper on the design, it's also important that you define your priorities for the new space and how you want to be working in terms of work-life balance, the choice you want to allow your people, the hours people will be working, how much flexibility you give them, the focus on well-being. Obviously, it's very important given the heightened focus we've got. Everybody's got a heightened focus on well-being at the moment. And most important of all, delivering to changing customer needs. Customers have changed during the pandemic, how they're engaging with us. How is that going to pan out post-COVID, and how is that going to change demands on our organisations and what workspaces we need to support that? So this is the process that we adopted with the Ingleton Wood team. And as I said before, it's even more relevant now with the greater uncertainty post-COVID, the whole process of establishing the vision and then gathering your evidence and basing your decisions on that evidence. So how do you establish your vision? So the first step we went through with Ingleton Wood was to establish this vision of how they wanted to work, when they wanted to work, and where they wanted to work. There were lots of scenarios we went through, exercises with team leaders, over the vision, but also went through exercises to understand their concerns over what agile working meant to them, how could they manage their teams, and we ran some specific training on this, so on managing remote workers, to give them confidence that it would work for them day two. And also we wanted to explore what the workplace was for. So looking at who were their stakeholders, what do the stakeholders need, what do stakeholders want from the workspace, what is the purpose, what is the fundamental purpose of the workspace, and what tasks and activities will be performed there. Again, as I said, very, very relevant now, or even more relevant now in the post-COVID world, is to understand and really challenge ourselves on what tasks will we be doing in the office, what will we be doing at home and other remote locations. So what is the office really for going forward? And finally, what does good look and feel like? I think, to me, the feel of the space is as important as the look. And when we were running these sessions, what we looked at was 5 areas, what we call the 5 E's. Now, I can't lay credit to all of these. The first 3 E's were developed by Frank Duffy back in the 1990s, when new ways of working, as it was then, first came about. It was something that Frank used quite a lot. But I've since added a couple of my own. So the 5 E's are: we need a space that is efficient. Obviously, we need, from Stuart's perspective, it was about staying cost neutral. The space had to be efficient. They wanted to stay in London. But it also has to be effective. It has to support the processes, support the stakeholders, support the people working in there, support the business's vision. But it also needs to be expressive. It needs to represent the brand. It has to represent, and in Stuart's case, or Ingleton Wood's case, their brand is the work that they do. So it's a fantastic brand ambassador for them, the space. But anybody's space, brand is built from the inside out very much. And having a space that expresses your brand is important. But the other 2 E's, more recently, space needs to be environmental, or rather, it's more around the whole CSR agenda. What can space do to help support and deliver your corporate social responsibility agenda? And that leads me to the 5th E. To me, a space needs to be extrovert. Now, that sounds a little bit unusual, a bit odd, but I think that's the most important of all. The space, a building and the workspace needs to be so much more than just a place for people to sit. It can do so much more for your organization and your community. Not just your local community. I'm not just talking, it can do things for people around. Certainly in the public sector, there's a big need for space to do that, but also your business ecosystem, your customers, your suppliers, your partners, other stakeholders. What can the building be that is so much more than just a place for people to sit? So we went through a process of gathering the data. So we established the vision, and then we went through a process of gathering data, a body of evidence, both quantitative and qualitative data, to provide that body of evidence to inform the strategy and inform decisions. This is a vital step. We undertook director interviews, focus groups, team workshops, and also used our online staff survey, which, as I said before, we've been using throughout the pandemic, to gather that good base of data, so that we had hard quantitative data from filing, data management audits, utilization surveys, obviously not so relevant at the moment, but also a good qualitative database as well of what people's desires were, people's working patterns likely to be, that sort of thing. So I'd say it's even more relevant at the moment in the current world to gather this subjective database, because at the moment we are lacking hard data. So we've got to base it on something. And using that sort of data to predict working patterns, likely office usage. That's something we'll probably cover in a subsequent webinar, but it's something very much that we did at this point to help Stuart and come up with the agile scenarios and the sort of working ratios that they would be adopting and the sort of spaces that they needed. So that data, we took all that data and developed a workplace strategy, working closely with Nicole and the Ingleton Wood design team to develop a space brief that can be used by Newton Perkins for the search for the new building, but also a base for the design brief for the space. And we looked at it as a number of zones, effectively a business lounge where an awful lot of the collaboration and client-facing activity might happen, a social hub, the beating heart of the space, We're actually seeing this a lot from workshops we're conducting at the moment, that people are missing the social interaction. So I think that social hub for space is even more important at the moment. And finally, task-based space. So bearing in mind that this is pre-COVID, post-COVID, we'll probably have taken even less emphasis on task-based space. We're seeing that as a definite swing. So that space, so this formed the space brief. We were able to collate a space schedule out of this, form the brief for Newton Perkins to go and look for space. And once the space was found, once the building was found, it was part of the due diligence process in analysing the buildings, taking this zonal brief, applying it to the different spaces that have been found, and allowed Ingleton Wood select Ailey Street as their preferred option. And then we could overlay that as a zonal model to sort of help the design forward, to act as the basis for the design, which neatly segues into Nicole's bit on how she took this forward and designed the space.
Thanks, Colin. Just wait for my slide to load, sorry. Right, as Colin was talking there, obviously we did a big study on the workplace analysis, and obviously that really informed our brief, the design, which I can't stress the importance of it. Really helped us collaborate our ideas and understand fully what we needed to achieve. But also at the same time, I needed to achieve in the design the partnerships aspiration as well for creating an agile working space, and also looking at the future and future-proofing our design. In the workplace analysis, actually, it raised some really key concerns and issues that we were going to have to address in design. I've listed some of the key ones here that we need to look at. Our existing office was a very traditional setup, and we were actually going to move to a very agile workspace. Ourselves as a design practice, it's really important that we actually show our brand. And in our previous office, that was quite lacking. So how was we going to reinforce our brand as Ingleton Wood, but also that we're a design practice, but a multidisciplinary practice at the same? How was we going to manage desks? We were going to move away from fully agile working spaces for everyone. What spaces would we provide to address some of the issues about quiet spaces, collaboration, building relationships? How would we ensure the technology was integrated? How would we rationalize storage solutions? So they're kind of some of the key issues that we sort of considered in our design. We decided to focus on the actual space. We needed to look at the constraints of the office and also the opportunities, and also about how the brief and the analysis could inform it. And it led to this. It led to basically an office design which is defined into two distinctive areas. The one at the front of the unit is called concentrate, which is this area. And then to the central area, into the rear of the office, we call that our collaboration area. One of the key things that's brought up in the analysis was actually that staff really struggled to find quiet spaces to do focus work. And actually, we were ending up with some staff leaving the building to actually go and find those quiet spaces. But also what's important about quiet spaces is that it's really personality driven. Someone may prefer to be in a self-contained unit, completely private. Some people may just want a semi-enclosed space. So actually, providing those kind of focus areas, there's layers to that and different spaces. We also wanted to provide a much more professional client-facing area to our office, and actually we located that in the front, so that when clients come in, they don't need to necessarily go all the way into the office. And so most of our client meetings take place in the main central meeting room at the front of the office. But we do have some clients that we do actually bring back to the collaboration area, so in a much more informal setting. And actually some clients really like that. They like to be in the hub of the office and see the creativity and see the different teams interacting. So actually that's worked really well. So the collaboration in the green area is kind of our main hub, and we call it our hub. So it's a really flexible space. It's a social hub, but it's used for informal meetings. It's used for people to have small little one-to-one meetings. We've got a big library in this area, so they can look at materials and things like that. And then surrounding this, we've got a small meeting room and a sort of informal sort of meeting booth. We've also got high benches, and then we've got our standard desk going around here. So the idea again is there's a mixture of different spaces in that space that staff can choose. But our focus really was provide an agile working space and give staff choice. That's really important, to give staff choice. And I think post-COVID is something that people really need to consider. People have been working from home for over a year, and they've chosen where they work. Okay, a bit more limited in your house. But again, it's about choice. And actually, when they come back into the office, you want them to feel comfortable, and it's really important about their well-being. So a lot of people, the thing they like working from home when children are not at home is actually the idea that they can actually quiet, focus, they're not being disturbed. So I think that's really important. But collaboration will be hugely important. That's the bit everyone's missing. That's the bit that we can't do online. We can do it to a degree, but actually having social interactions, building relationships back up, that's going to be really important post-COVID. So I think spaces like that need to be really considered in any office designs that anyone's looking at, really. So what went into our concentrate area? So as I touched on, we want to have a client-facing area. So we have our main meeting room, and that's used for obviously internal meetings, it's used for client meetings. You know, going forward, there's going to be a big drive on lots of Zoom and Teams meetings. So that meeting space will get used a lot. But also meeting rooms, and we've got it quite open at the front. It's also a workspace. You know, if people want to work quietly and it's in concentrate space, there's nothing stopping people doing that. So they can go in there, and again, it's an additional workspace. So I think what's important, especially in an office space of this size, is actually spaces work quite hard. Another thing with our office is that lots of staff are in and out of the office all the time. They're going to do client meetings, they're going on site visits. So what was really important is that we provided a touchdown space. So we provided a really nice high bench space that people could come in, touch down, check on emails, do what they needed to do and leave the office. But actually they haven't had to come all the way into the main office space to do that. But again, it's another space that people use to work quietly and to do focus work. They might not want to be in an enclosed booth, which is shown up here in the top right. Again, it's this idea of layers of how people want to, you know, work quietly. Do they want to be fully enclosed? Do they want to be a semi-enclosed space? Actually, they're quite happy if there was a few of them sitting there and they wanted to feel like they're surrounded by people. And I think understanding that's really important. To collaborate. So this is the main hub of our office. So we have this large central space, which is an open plan kitchen area. And we designed this bespoke, very large communal table area. And the idea is that this space is central for our office. What we really lacked in our existing office, we had a very small tea point. And actually what's really important for relationships, especially the way we work on projects as teams, is actually social interactions are happening all the time. You know, having that cup of tea, sitting with different people from different teams and having a lunch is really important. But one of the other things that was brought up in the workplace analysis is lots of collaboration was happening, which you would expect in a multi-disc practice. However, what was happening was it was happening around people's desks, because everyone's argument to that was, it's really quick. We grab the chairs, we bring them around a screen and we can quickly talk. That's great, but not really for the other people that are sitting on that bank of desks. So actually what we looked at was, well, there is no collaboration spaces in that office. There is nowhere that they can take their drawings away quickly. It was very limited. We had quite a big meeting room. So we needed to look at spaces that people could collaborate and lay out drawings. So a lot of it happens in this hub area. Some of it happens as like a little meeting booth. It happens there. Sometimes it happens in the meeting room. But what's really important, especially for the way we work and probably most organizations, is the technology is integrated. It's very easy for people to move into a space, click their laptop in, and the screens everywhere. And going forward, that's going to be really important, obviously, with more Teams meetings, more Zoom meetings. You know, it might be half your teams in the office. Some other people are outside the office. You could be working with other consultants, but do they really need to travel to the office? So I think that's really, really important space for us. The other things we had in this space were like high benches, again, so people can touch down, but not just that. Actually, some people don't want to sit at a desk all day. Actually, they want to move away from their desk, but they want to sit in a different environment. We had height adjustable desks, again, giving staff choice about where they sit. None of the desks are assigned. one of the issues we had was that we were all sitting in our teams per discipline. So architects all sitting together, engineers all sitting together, building surveyors, etc. But actually that's really great, but also it has its disadvantages that we work on multi-disc projects. So actually we really need to come together as teams. So when staff come in, if they're working on a project together, actually it's really nice that they can come in the morning or the afternoon and choose where they sit. And actually then those very quick conversations that happen and you want to ask a quick question to someone, they're right next to you. And actually we have, you know, as Stuart raised at the beginning, we've sort of been in the new setup for a period of time between COVID. But we already noticed it, the practice already noticed that the relationships were really improving. And it's because of that flexibility and people managing to talk to each other, and it's not always based on a formal meeting. And there will be days that people come in and sit in their teams, and that's great as well, because obviously we need to make sure that's working. But actually staff took to the non-assigned desk, and it's fine. Everyone's got a staff locker, so they've got places for things like that. Also, we're a library. We've put our library central in the office, and actually that gets used a lot more now because it's more amenable. It's there, it's actually part of the office. It's doing a dual purpose. It divides a space, it helps some acoustics, but actually it gives a really nice way for us to show clients materials and products and things like that. So yeah, so that's kind of the spaces that we're using in those areas. So some other key considerations really in an office design that especially that we considered as well. So acoustics are really important. Any open plan office, you need to consider it. But even more so when you're doing an agile work environment, especially when you're showing clear divisions of different kind of spaces. So we looked at doing things like suspended ceiling panels. We also use planting. We also use natural materials to walls. We use soft flooring, so we use carpet in areas and things like that. Furniture, which I'm going to touch on in a bit more detail on the next slide. Agile working, the furniture is the thing you really need to get right, because actually what we needed to do is we needed to really consider what kind of spaces we needed to provide in this office area and what furniture is going to help and how is it going to make staff use the spaces, and it needs to work. You know, you can't just put furniture out and hope staff will use it. It needs to be the right furniture. Technology needs to be integrated. All our staff have laptops, all the desks have docking stations, which is great. It needs to be user friendly and it needs to be quick. We all know everyone expects everything to work instantaneously these days. So they need to be able to go in a space, put their laptop down and it come on, and they've got screens and everything. And that, I think that was really successful that we did do that. Finishes, I think designs of spaces need to be really considered. And I think going forward even more so, you know, people have been used to working from home, you know, in a much comfortable environment. You know, lots of people take a lot of care and consideration into their environment, and actually offices need to be comfortable. And we really focus on interiors, about using different materials, different textures, trying to use them to define spaces. We've got a real biophilic theme sort of going through all our design. So lots of the materials that we use, and we're trying to connect with the nature. And, you know, even, you know, we're in the heart of the city, so we have put a brick wall into the meeting room because, again, it reflects the urban context of our building as well. So the idea is just to relate to beyond the office. I think it's really important. And also it gives you the opportunity to reinforce your brand. Obviously we're a design practice, so it's really important for us to do that. But as you can see in the top right, you know, we integrated with a feature wall our strap line that we use as a practice. And I think it's really nice to do things like that, you know, to show clients what you're about and what your organisation provides. And I think that's really important. The furniture, I mean, this gives you a bit of an overview. I mean, obviously we work on a lot of projects, and so we have a really good understanding of furniture. And obviously there's lots of organisations that will be on this call that are not, you know, don't work in design and things like that. So but even us, we worked really closely with Rainbow Design, who are a well-known organisation, and they are really specialists on lots of different furniture. They completely understand it. We really took our time to carefully consider what furniture solutions that we use in our space. We went and visited lots of the showrooms in Clerkenwell, which is a really good top tip. It's worth seeing the furniture, sitting on the chairs, looking at the different environments. And post-COVID, that the furniture world, especially for office design, is forever evolving, and post-COVID there's going to be so many new products that are going to come onto the market because it's all about these different spaces. But the great thing about this is it's all furniture solutions, so it's completely flexible. We needed to design an office that was fully flexible, so it's about agile working, it's about future proofing. COVID is an issue, but COVID is more about that it's actually just moved us all on. It's made everyone really embrace agile working and actually look at the office in a different way. So I think that's what needs to be really looked at. And you'll see here, we've got different kind of spaces. Some of the ones I touched on earlier, which was for the concentrate area. We've got, you know, staff lockers. That's really important. So staff feel like they've got somewhere to put things, and just from a practical point of view, you need that. Operator chairs, you know, really think about them. Your benching and desking. You know, we've got benching. So if there's only a couple of people in, people can spread out across a desk. We've got height adjustable, again, from a well-being point of view is really important. And then just changing the language of the space, put a high bench in, let people work at a different level and things like that. And yeah, I think that's what you, focus on furniture, I think, really.
Brilliant. Colin, are you? Oh, there you go.
Okay, thanks, Nicole. As you can see, it's a really interesting space. What Nicole and her team have done in what is essentially a small space, 3,600 square feet, to create all these different areas, all this choice, all this flexibility. I think it's a great model for potentially what we're going to need in this post-COVID Brave New world. It is an uncertain world, but just to wrap up with a few thoughts, we are seeing a step change in the relationship with the office. We will definitely see a demand for much more flexibility in terms of where, when, and how people work. We're already seeing, and as brought out by Nicole in her design, we're already seeing an increased focus on well-being, whether that be biophilic design or whether that be the actual well-being practices and policies and guidelines and support you put in place for your staff. A big increase in focus on well-being, a focus on mental health issues, issues with isolation, boredom, loneliness, that this enforced lockdown has caused, and if we're not careful, with an increase in long-term increase in home working, will continue. We need to ensure that we get good levels of interaction with colleagues. But obviously, we're also going to see a significantly reduced utilisation post-COVID. Pre-COVID, we were typically seeing utilisation levels when we did all our utilisation surveys at around 50%, 55% at peak at the very best. And although we can't do utilisation surveys at the moment, I think they're going to come back with a vengeance when we start really trying to analyse, once people come back to the office properly, how offices are working for us. But the bottom line is all of this gives us an opportunity to reinvent and realign space, to rationalise our real estate, potentially make some savings, but make it much, much more relevant to our futures and how we want to work. And also, we may see an increase in diversity in recruitment, an improvement in staff attraction and retention if you allow these flexible working practices, an improvement in people's work-life balance if it's done right. But we're definitely going to see a rise in hybrid working models and the need for spaces such as Ingleton Wood space, smaller flexible spaces, imaginative, very imaginative space that really support people, customers, and provide the space that they need and support the tasks that we're all doing. So Stuart, sort of over to you for your final few words.
Hi, thanks, Colin. I'd just like to thank everyone really for joining. Hopefully everyone's found it useful, a useful case study. Hopefully we haven't gone into too much detail, but it gives you a really good insight about the different stages and process that we've gone through and the really great result that we've ended up with. We probably haven't got time for Q&A, so we've probably run over too far with our excitement about telling you how we got to where we got to. But if you'd like to send in your questions, we will always be happy to answer them and respond to you. But again, I just, on behalf of everyone on here, I'd like to thank you for taking some time to join us today.
We've got 9 questions already, and what we can do is we will run through them and answer them post call, and circulate the answers to everybody, as well as a link to the recording. If that's right, Sarah?
Yes, please. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Some great questions, but I'm very conscious that we asked for 45 minutes of your time and we've taken it. So thank you for those. We've noted them. There's still more coming in, and we will look forward to sharing them with you. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, really appreciate your time, and I hope it was interesting. Thank you. And say, as Stuart said, either pop questions in the chat or send Sarah an email, and we can make sure your questions are answered.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.